I think when we get to the end of this run of images, I'm going to make a start. Okay. Right. Hello and welcome to this Artists in Conversation event titled Luna Park 10 Years, a case study for public art in the 21st century. My name is Vicky Fear. I'm the Curator Programme Manager at Aspex, and I'll be managing the technical side of this Zoom, so I will disappear from view. We're delighted to be hosting this conversation this evening and to be joined by artists Heather and Ivan Morison, Hannah Firth, the Director of Programme at Chapter in Cardiff, and Joanne Bushnell, the Director of Aspex in Portsmouth. This event is taking place this evening on the 10th anniversary of the launch weekend of Luna Park in 2010, which will be the focus of the conversation. Heather and Ivan Morison have been commissioned by Aspex to rebuild the sculpture in virtual reality, and you should have received a link to the project by email, but I will also share it in the chat after I've finished speaking, along with a link to the Bring Back the South Sea Dinosaur crowdfunder campaign, which we launched on Friday morning. We expect that this conversation will go on for about 40 minutes and then the panel will answer questions. So you can send questions throughout using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat function is also open, but please be mindful that lots of messages in the chat can be quite distracting mid-conversation. Finally, this conversation is being recorded, so you might want to keep that in mind when you send your questions through. And without further ado, I'm going to hand on over to Joanne Bushnell.
Hi, welcome everyone. Well, I will try and drive the conversation into specific directions, but we may well meander off down memory lane. It's intended to be quite a fluid talk today. But we want to start with the sort of background and the initial ideas. So I thought the best place to start would be with Hannah, who of course had those initial conversations with Heather and Ivan.
Thanks, Jo. Hi, everybody. So our conversations, my conversations with Heather and Ivan started back in 2008, when Chapter was just about to go into a period of redevelopment. For those that don't know Chapter, it's a large multi-art form venue in Cardiff that was set up in 1971 by a group of artists, and its doors had been open ever since. So this was really the first time that the doors of the building were going to be closed. And so a lot of our conversations were about how we could continue to keep the work of artists visible and our programme visible, and how we might create meeting spaces for the people that were without a building for the first time, because we were getting between about 400,000 and 500,000 people a year through our doors. And it was a very important, not only artistic venue, but community centre. So we managed to get some funding to commission 3 projects to create meeting places, and finished 2 of them quite early on in the redevelopment. And that was with Hassan Hajjaj and Cecile Johnson-Solis. And the final commission was with Heather and Ivan. And we talked for quite a long period of time about what potential artwork they might create. We had some really excellent conversations, but Heather and Ivan didn't want that space to be prescriptive. It was really a space for imagination, a space that might be completed by the people that used it, the audience that was there. And we had a final meeting at Chapter where Heather and Ivan came to visit me. And Vicky, if we can get the black and white image up, please. They presented me with a photograph, and this was the photograph that they brought to the meeting. So they were like, oh, yeah, we want to create a 20-metre long, 16-metre high dinosaur, like an American roadside dinosaur for Cardiff. So I was like, okay. I mean, really exciting project, but I could see that it was going to be a really challenging project as well. And we had a little bit of funding, like I said, but getting some quotes in, we were looking at a project that was probably very much out of our reach. The dinosaur design was based on the Ultrasaurus, which was a dinosaur that was discovered in the 1970s, which was considered to be the largest dinosaur that had ever walked the earth, but actually subsequently was found to be the bones of two different dinosaurs. So it was a kind of fictional beast, if you like, and that was something that really interested Heather and Ivan. And I was talking to Joe Bushnell at Aspex Gallery about this project and how exciting it was, but how frustrated I was that I couldn't it didn't look like it was going to happen because it was so ambitious and it was so expensive. And it really struck a chord with Joe. Joe was sort of interested also, like Chapter, in thinking about how you engage with audiences outside of the building. And although the gallery was open at Aspex, how could you connect in Southsea in Portsmouth? And Joe was like, is this something that we could co-commission with you? Is it possible that the dinosaur could be in two different locations? And I was like, I don't know. And Joe then went on to talk to First Sight in Colchester, who were also really excited about Heather and Ivan's proposal. They were in a period of redevelopment, and they also asked if they could come in as commissioning partners. So it was great. On the one hand, we had more resources and more funding from the different venues, but also this challenge now of having one potential dinosaur in three potential locations. How could we possibly make this happen? And it just so happened that I'd been having a conversation with an artist in Dublin called Alan Phelan, who'd been working with a Serbian engineer called Goran. And he put me in touch with Goran and said, see whether he can come up with a solution for you. So I contacted Goran. I said, is this something that you can do for us? And he came back with a proposal for a kind of mobile sculpture that could be constructed out of the materials that Yugo cars were made from, which was lightweight, so it could be transported and taken apart and put back together quite easily. It could be done. And really that's how the Ultrasaurus was born.
Brilliant, thanks, Hannah. I'll try and remember to pick up on the importance of cultural tourism and European funding later. Heather, can we hand over to you to talk about how the idea developed?
You know, when you just said, well, that's so many stories, isn't it? Kind of like, and I think that's sort of that's how the work grows. It grows with lots of different, as you're trying to make the work happen, the work grows, and things and people and places start to add into the work, and the work, even before it's realized, it becomes lots of different things. And you know, that image that you were showing is the thing that really struck me about that image was thinking about what it would be like standing in the city in Cardiff and looking up and seeing it coming across the city. So how exciting it would be, and how unusual and how joyful, you know, as well. So and I think there's something in all of those, that way of describing the work, to grow it from that point. So it doesn't make sense, so that's absolutely right. So that's okay, that's totally fine. And then you grow it, and you have to we were just talking about this earlier, weren't we, Ivan, about the fact that you have to really reach really far with your ideas, and then you work from that point, and make lots of decisions along the way, but still keeping hold of that original ambition. So I think then, so the idea grows through the collaborative process with people and fabrication and site and so on. It was very exciting, the idea of it being in Portsmouth, because the South Sea Common was absolutely perfect for it. Like it would have been wonderful to helicopter it in and then land it, the whole crowd of us there, that sort of, I mean, that didn't happen, but it's still, it began to become right in different ways. So that growing of an idea and the connection then with Serbia felt very, it felt like it was really starting to build in terms of what what the idea was as well. And the fact that you had this connection with Yugo cars, that works. I can't tell you how it works. Maybe Ivan, you could add in at that point about the manufacture and making of the work. No, is he gonna?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
well,
Remember going to see Goran in Dublin?
Yeah, I remember going to see Goran in Dublin. And you know, sometimes like in projects, I think it's sometimes things build slowly and sensibly, and they kind of each step makes sense. And then sometimes there's just like a bomb in a project, you know, and none of it makes sense, but by its very presence, everything, you know, it becomes something more than you could have imagined, really, you know. So instead of it being a project specifically about Cardiff or about Portsmouth, it became a project about something about all those places, but those places, you know, reflected from like the stranger's view. It was almost like the dinosaur became this idea of the other, who was very much visiting and very much as kind of reflecting back people, you know, those places in its presence. So as much as, so it kind of became this sort of strange, dark presence in a way, or something coming from overseas. And as you know, and we like that idea of this uninvited visitor. And in as much as you might, or residents might project an opinion about the dinosaur equally had its own opinion about you. So that idea that it came from somewhere very different, almost unimaginable, you know, unreachable, I think in the title of the film, it had that within the title. So the introduction of the fabrication was this really important step in the work, you know, and we try to, and part of our process, try to keep that openness to sort of unexpected things coming into the work and allow work to grow. And sometimes that's the work's made and then things happen to the work, but sometimes also it's just about planting the seed of an idea, as Heather's saying, and allowing that to grow. Yeah, so there was the idea of it being built in Serbia, and then there was very much the reality of it being built in Serbia, which again became its own thing in itself, you know. Like we really do go on a lot about process and about engaging with that, and you know, that being so much a part of the work. And this work, in this case, it really did, you know. In some things, in some pieces, you know, you get to a point where it's going to be made, and then it's made, and then you present the work. In this case, it was a journey in itself, quite a remarkable journey. I mean, it was an impossibly hard journey at times, But that, I think I was reflecting about it today, I think it was just a real clashing cultures as well, in terms of our expectations about how you work and their expectations about how they work. And, you know, interestingly, you know, we've had Tekla from the studio working on the project, and she, you know, she comes from that part of the world, and she saw it as that idea of moments of rest, a moment of work, a moment of rest, a moment of work, as entirely like very familiar to her. Whereas I saw it when we had like a hard deadline, that it was incredibly frustrating, you know. So and I think in the film we try to reflect that. 1 second. Yeah, you can eat the crumble now. Okay. Anyone else want to say anything about that?
Shall I go on to talk about the installation in Portsmouth and how that went? I wrote a piece for the Portsmouth News this week where I was sort of dredging back through the memories. And
is that because you have a column now?
Yes, it is.
Very good.
Excited. It was dusk. So, but last week in July, and it must have been pretty late because it's not dark now. So probably about 8, nearly 9 o'clock, and these lorries pulled up on Southsea Common. We were expecting 3. Pretty sure there were 4. So it was like a whole extra bit of dinosaur that arrived, and of course the pieces were all like a giant dinosaur jigsaw puzzle, child's toy, and all got unloaded in the dark. And then the next day, the Goran and the Serbian crew got together with members of my team and started to piece it all together. We had a huge crane. There were some very interesting issues around UK health and safety laws that had to be reiterated through the installation process. But it was just extraordinary, magical, and like all of these projects, absolutely to the wire. I'm beginning to feel you make a habit of this, Ivan. Because it was, we literally were pushing the scaffold tower away as the brass band piped up for the grand opening on Saturday, the 31st of July 2010. And it was an extraordinary positive experience as I remember it. We wanted to have a festival atmosphere, very much taking cues from the film An Unreachable Country, A Long Way to Go. So we had a hog roast, as there had been a hog roast featured within the film. And it was a real party atmosphere, and very much sort of fulfilling what Heather and Ivan had talked about with me about it really being a meeting place, that was its principal function. And the response in Portsmouth was absolutely phenomenal. Everyone knew about the dinosaur. Everyone had taken a photograph with the dinosaur. The grass was completely worn out around it. And I do think, you know, if we're going to try and identify ways to demonstrate the value and the impact of public art, then worn out grass has got to be up there as a good one. I'll talk more about responses to it going a bit later, but it was phenomenal. People loved it. It got huge amount of attention, and people enjoyed it and used it as that meeting place all summer.
when you walked, what was really wonderful is that kind of vista of seeing it when you came across the common, like it was, and the fact that it was sort of you, even when you could just drive past and you knew it was there, like I really enjoyed that, and I liked the sort of like standing there. I mean, we were there, we had our daughter was 4 at the time, and just being with her and just sort of seeing her and other people just being kind of like rushing towards it, and then when I saw some of the photographs of people sitting underneath it, I liked those photographs a lot, especially at the evening ones. And that was when it really made me think back to those initial conversations that we'd had, Hannah, about, kind of having a meeting place and a community place, and how I think about what's that like to sit underneath a dinosaur of an evening, like that was something I hoped was a bit magical, actually. I hoped that and if you don't, the thing about sort of public artworks is, if you don't, although if we hadn't put it there, people would have gone there, but they wouldn't have gone to that space. So it's sort of like a kind of and regardless of how you feel about it, it draws you in, to stop, and makes you stop. And then I hope what it does is that it does all those things of, like, it questions all the time. It's like, what's it on earth it doing here? Why is it here? Or, what's it made of? Where's it come from? What's the connection? All those sorts of things. And certainly some of the photographs of, because that common's used for loads and loads of different things, so all that other activity happened, didn't it, alongside. And then there was just the dinosaur kind of poking up in a sea of minis, or or like a kite festival, or that sort of thing. It was like looking at everyone, or just observing things that were going on, and looking after people. I hoped something like that. That's how it felt. It didn't feel visiting and watching, I suppose.
It has incredible presence. The fact that you could see it from the Isle of Wight. There was some fantastic photographs taken from the Spinnaker Tower that were almost aerial. It was very much a visitor, and very much existed within the summer activity of the Common, which has an event on almost every weekend normally.
It seemed to make sense to be, this is going to sound bonk, but it seemed to be fine at those events. This is what's interesting. Like, it wasn't like it was fine at the mini event of all those minis. It was like it was in the right company, and that's that's really interesting to think about in relation to public art. It seemed to be all right. It seemed to work with what was going on around it. Certainly, I mean, I wasn't there all the time, but certainly in the photographs that I saw, it was like, it seemed to work if you were getting married, and if you needed to stand under it while it's raining, it was sort of useful for that too, I suppose.
Ivan, do you want to go on to talk about the VR version?
Can do, yeah. I think when Joe and Aspex started began to talk to us about this 10-year anniversary and what we might do for that, I think immediately the idea that Luna Park might return is really appealing, but that it might return like 10 years on, like it's slightly reinvented itself, was the idea, and obviously still now, and when Joe began to talk to us, obviously the idea of physically gathering was an impossibility, and so we kind of wanted to sort of, maybe there's a way that we can still create a space where people can gather in a really similar way underneath Luna Park, and sort of try and recreate that experience. And now with the sort of technology, there's some really accessible VR technology that allows us to do that. I don't know anyone's, if they've not seen that, I can just share my screen now and you can have a look at the site, if that's okay. If the host, Vicky, if you could allow me to share my screen. Here we go. So this is, I don't know what she's not watching Luna Park. It's meant to be watching the Zoom.
I saw us for
You
a
did?
moment. Yeah.
Good. Maybe I'm just streaming too many things now.
Yeah.
Within this. But so we created this space here. So it's a space that has the common in it, and it's a space that has Luna Park in it. It has the original commemorative sign in it. And also I've disabled the sound. Maybe I can turn the sound back on. I might get some horrible feedback here. Let's see. And also I can just share my screen. Sound here. We can hear this. So we have, within the site, we have embedded in it sounds that were there on the opening day, as well as various memories of people as they recount the memories of Luna Park. And we also have a virtual cinema in here where you can watch the film of the original making of Luna Park as well. Yeah, and as it's a chat room, it means that people can come in and they can meet here and they can talk to each other. And because there's a clever thing called proximity sound, it means that as you stand closer to people, you can form groups and have individual chats as well. And I don't know about any of you, but when we first had this up, like, it was a little bit uncanny. It did feel like we were standing underneath Luna Park. So I mean, I'm really happy about how it's worked. I mean, and I hope people do come and visit it. And one more thing, just to advertise this while we're here, it's a really nice feature in that there's also, we now have a Luna Park hotline. So you can call up and you can speak to Luna Park, and you can also leave your memories of Luna Park, and how, I think we're interested not just in your memories of that time, but as it's a 10-year anniversary, I think is a really interesting block of time. So we're very interested in how people have sort of see change that has happened in Portsmouth and more broadly and more personally, and also using that idea of a block of 10 years, how they might sort of see change in 10 years from now as well. We look at change pretty tightly, you know, about tomorrow and next week and next month, how we might see Portsmouth specifically in 10 years time as well. So the hotline
I think it's hard to hear you with that. Work. Yeah.
A lot of chatting, hey?
There's a lot of chat. It was a party. It's a party with the dinosaur.
Yeah.
So I'm just a little conscious of time now. So I'll hurtle on. Of course, we can't really have a conversation about Luna Park without talking about its destruction. It was due to leave us in Portsmouth on the 10th of October, but it burnt down in the early hours of the morning on the 1st of October. So that was just possibly one of the worst professional days of my life. really quite grueling. Found out about it via the BBC News calling the chair of our trustees. So it was a really sort of convoluted way to hear about it. And yes, it was just a very bad situation. But aside from all the sort of making the site safe and so on, it was the fallout within the community. The work was directly opposite Mozzarella Joe's, and they reported back that there were just children in floods of tears, you know, for weeks after this, and you know, come in remembering the dinosaur and being really sad. I think, yeah, we showed some photographs earlier. Someone knitted RIP, and it, you know, a decade or so after Lady Diana's funeral, people kind of went and put flowers there, and really, it really meant something to people. And a young 16-year-old boy set up a Facebook group called RIP South Sea Dinosaur, which I think got 12,500 followers, which 10 years ago was, you know, an enormous number of people to engage with a project in that kind of way. Many people hadn't actually even realised it was art, but the fire, the news spread probably much further than the news of the original work. It was covered in the Sun newspaper, in Chinese publications and so on. So it was quite extraordinary, the impact. Heather, Ivan, do you want to say anything about that?
It was quite difficult to take all of that, a lot of it in, because it was so shocking. And particularly on the day, and the fact that Ivan was in Vancouver opening a show, and so he didn't know about it, and we had to spend the day, you know, kind of you were there dealing with things, and I had to come with my little daughter and see it as well. And I'm quite kind of like, when you get like tremendous shocks in life, which happen because life is very unpredictable, I'm not one to sort of immediately kind of, I had to sit with it for quite a while, because I wasn't sure how to respond at all. You know, I mean, my initial response was like just a pure emotional response. But I really wanted to think about it as well. And that took quite a long time, actually, you know, to do that. And it's now become part of the story of the piece. So, but to be frank, and it's not, you know, I wasn't at the time, I didn't feel very professional. I just felt really, really upset, you know, and shocked, and so it takes a while to think critically about, as you're supposed to do, you know, to think about it theoretically and put it into context and see all that stuff, you know. And it, even now, when we first did the, you know, the VR part of it, it was quite like, it felt really real, and then I had a sort of whoosh of emotion around it too, you know. It was actually very emotional time personally for me anyway, you know, so that there were other things going on, you know, so yeah, it was very and having to phone Ivan and tell him at some point, I think it was at least 6 or 7 o'clock at that evening, and when most of the news stuff had all happened by that point, I think that I managed to speak to him. Yeah.
And of course I had to tell Hannah.
So that was not a very good early morning call for me. I just remember it was just a shock, like Heather said, yeah. And then really upset because we'd worked on it for so long, and because it had been so well received in Southsea, and the uprising of emotion from the public in Southsea. I mean, it was quite a kind of outpouring. It's quite extraordinary to see it, actually.
I got a lot of emails that day from people emailing us directly, and I remember thinking at the time, I know this is important, like important in a kind of like, I know that it doesn't happen the way that people contacting me directly and writing me long emails about it, and I thought, this hasn't happened before. I mean, obviously a piece of work hasn't, you know, that the work hasn't been destroyed before, but also just sort of people reaching out. And I remember thinking, there's something in it, but I couldn't kind of engage with that. But then that is kind of why we're here now talking about it, because I hope that it hasn't gone away completely. So I'm really interested in investigating that some more.
Yeah. Hannah, do you want to tell us more about what happened in Colchester and then Cardiff?
Yeah. So obviously, I got the early morning phone call from Joe about the destruction of the dinosaur, and then following on from that, there was some really quite extraordinary photographic images. I can't remember, Ivan, did you take them? Yeah. I mean, they were incredibly beautiful amidst all this kind of trauma that we were all feeling. And it was as if a kind of meteorite had landed on a dinosaur and destroyed it. And so, I mean, what was really quite interesting was Colchester First Sight were really open to thinking about how they could connect the project with their audiences, even though the dinosaur was no longer there. And it took on this other kind of narrative, really, didn't it? Which was a kind of post-apocalyptic narrative. And so I think First Sight had an exhibition of the photographic images, and we commissioned a text from Eric. What was Eric's last name? Fredrickson. Is that on? I think that's on the website, or it will be made available on the website.
Yeah.
And they held a symposium on the destruction of artworks. So there's a lot of dialogue still around the project. It was still alive in a sense, even though the sculpture itself was no longer there. And we were still really keen to work with Heather and Ivan on a sculpture, on a project for Cardiff. And Vicky, could you get the images of the other sculpture that I sent you up on the screen, please? So eventually we were able to commission a new piece for Cardiff from Heather and Ivan called Love Me or Leave Me Alone, which is pretty much on the site where the dinosaur was going to originally be put. And this is a kind of a sculpture that also has a little cafe catering operation kiosk inside there. You can see a couple of people working in it. And we've held a few events there where we've had live music and some outdoor cinema screenings, and served sort of hot chocolate and donuts from inside. And it's a permanent sculpture in Cardiff, so it's been a really wonderful outcome. I think Heather and Ivan, what we'd ultimately like to do is for this kiosk, this cafe, to be handed over to the community so that they can hold events or run a catering operation. It's got a kind of natural amphitheatre in front of it. So Heather and Ivan made this beautiful table as well. So it really lends itself to events there and activity. So that's the long-term hope for the project. But, you know, it's been great as an outcome from Ultrasaurus to be able to commission something from the ashes of that's, you know, equally exciting and interesting for Cardiff. Yeah, so if you're in Cardiff Bay, you can still see this piece.
Fantastic. So, so in terms of the impact on Portsmouth, people have been saying to me for the last 10 years, when are you going to bring the dinosaur back? When are you going to bring the dinosaur back? I go, no, we're not. And then a simple conversation with Hannah, Heather and Ivan only about 3 months ago. We were sort of really in the thick of lockdown, and as Ivan said, thinking about how we could do some kind of a program to engage our audiences when they couldn't come to the gallery. We've still not reopened. A conversation which was simply, shall we do this event and screen the film again, turned into a much bigger proposition. And I know we've talked a bit more about a bit about the VR, but is there anything you want to say about sort of the existing the project we've just launched, Luna Park 10 years?
And the future.
Well, yeah, and then we'll come on to the future. Well, actually, it's all one and the same, really, because what we're doing now is...
What feels so nice about the project is that we've kind of framed it in these sort of 3 stages, and where each stage sort of builds to the next stage. You know, like, we hate to do any work that doesn't do something, you know, that doesn't connect to people and doesn't do something positive. So the VR version of Luna Park at the moment, and the website that's been launched, and all the activities that are going on in the next couple of months, is collecting memories, and also is an opportunity to gather more support and interest for the future permanent piece. And then over the next year, there'll be again a further sort of period of gathering and building, and I'm going to be commissioning this radio audio piece as well that documents this process. And I'm allowed to go on to what the final piece is, Jo.
Yeah.
And then the final piece in this conversation Jo mentioned, we all agreed it would be lovely if Luna Park came back to the common, but there was something really lovely if it came back like much smaller, back in its almost to its original size of the maquette that I first showed Hannah and Jo. Actually, we had a maquette, a model of the dinosaur about this big that Hannah has there.
You
So,
covering up the fact
covering up its broken legs.
If it came back, I think that's 1 to 100 scale. So maybe I think it's going to be 1 to 50 scale now. So Luna Park back, but as a small piece that could sit there. It sits on a beautiful plinth as well. But there's the additional benefit that we can take the sort of VR world that we have, and we can use augmented reality as well. So within the plinth, there'll be a QR code you can scan, or whatever else is happening in a year's time. And it means that you'll be able to see the full-size Luna Park stood there next to the small Luna Park, along with all the memories that we've gathered and the voices and everything else. So there's this lovely play, I think, between what was there, this commemoration of it in terms of materials and scale, and technology, and still this sense of play and sort of fun with the whole idea of it.
I'm really looking forward to talking to people about it. That's what I'd like to do in the next 12 months, you know, and just have some conversations with that work as a kind of like starting point.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter kind of where we go with that. It's a nice place to start, because there were so many extraordinary photographs and things that happened and people connected with it, and then that it's that in a way that's really interests me, using that artwork as a conduit for talking to people. You know, and recording those, making an archive of discussions with a dinosaur, and you know, as a starting point. and then those being part of the work, and then, you know, the idea of making audio work from all of those as well is just it's that thing of like growing an idea, you know, just let's keep it growing, because who knows what might happen from those conversations. And so, you know, that will be sort of phase 2 really over the next 12 months of doing that as well.
And it's been, certainly from the gallery's perspective, it's been so fantastic to look at different technologies we can use to realise this work that weren't around 10 years ago, or that certainly we wouldn't have access to. So that really sort of presents some really exciting opportunities. And also, I think what's been very important for us is thinking about who we can engage with art, because, you know, teenagers are not an easy audience to generally engage, and yet these teenagers that grew up in Southsea and Portsmouth have grown up remembering that extraordinary experience 10 years ago, and it gives us a really exciting opportunity to explore working with that audience group.
I think as well, you know, what's been really extraordinary about the last few months and having to work a lot more with digital technologies is also working with people in their 40s, 50s and 60s as well, you know, like, because what we've had to do, and I think this is happening all over the place, is we've had to find a way of connecting. And so it's sort of forced us to do that, but also it means there's a certain particular aesthetic that's coming out around digital, because and there's also a particular kind of way of it being used. So I think that's been thinking, I hope what will happen is someone who may not have any connection or may have never experienced anything in VR before, but knows the dinosaur, will be like, I'm going to go in that VR world because I know the dinosaur. So and that will be their way of kind of, you know, their it's a hand holding to them to pull them in to get kind of involved as well. It's become so much wider in relation. And I mean, the other thing as well is that there's a whole load of people who are very interested in kind of gaming, which maybe don't go to art galleries, but they certainly, so there's that sort of, there's another world there too, you know. Oh, look, there's that cat. Oh, the cat's not in my good books at the moment.
I've unmuted because mine was meowing too loud.
Our cat ate our son's hamster last night.
Yes.
That's horrific.
It was awful.
That's really horrible.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. We are all we are grieving, all of us. It's really horrible. You know, you can't look at your cat now and just like
that with the cat. So I think this is a good time to open out for questions. There aren't any questions at the moment. So while maybe someone writes a question, maybe someone won't. Anything from, oh, I've got hang on. I can't read and think at the same time. Is that a comment, Vicky? Yeah.
I'd like to say something while we're waiting. Just how I think what's become interesting about what's interesting now about the project is this idea of duration, and about this idea of time passing, and how when Luna Park was in Portsmouth, how people did connect with it in some way or engage with it. And then I think because of the fire specifically, there's that moment of huge sort of rupture in a way, you know, how it's only those sort of events out of the blue or unusual events that really stick in our minds in a way. You know, like you could go to school for 14 years, but it's that one holiday, you know, that you remember, and you don't remember anything about every other day of your childhood. So like Luna Park created that the unfortunate destruction of Luna Park created that moment of rupture, and it really sort of I guess as a pin for that period in Portsmouth. And now 10 years later we're here again, and we're also in this sort of period of rupture as well. You know, like this will be a marker in time, you know, coincidentally 10 years later. So I think that's why I think it becomes like an interesting way to frame that time in between, and to sort of begin to look at that and to think forward into the future as well, about how we would, you know, hope to see things in 10 years from now. There's something really interesting in that.
Right. I realised that what I was trying to read was actually Vicky asking a question, but she can't type in the Q&A. So collection integration of memories in the future work really sets this apart from other sculptures in public space. Heather and Ivan, would you describe it as a collaborative work? And how do you feel about the issue that some people won't visit the digital archive and will only see the bronze?
I don't mind in terms of how people respond to and how they interact with the work. I can't control any of that. I think it is our job to make sure that the work, everything stands, everything is fine by it, in whichever way you encounter it, you know, it works in that way. So I think we've thought about that journey of like, what would it be like to walk across and then encounter a, you know, a scaled Ultrasaurus in front of you, bronze Ultrasaurus, and actually I hope I can, that would work. I think you would touch it, you know, and there might be something you'd make your own reasons up in relation to that. That's the interesting thing about, and the very root of working in public art. You can't control it, as well we've seen in the last few months.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how it should be. Yeah, for sure.
That's been very much on our minds at the gallery, this feeling of, actually, and it's one of the reasons why we started the fundraising campaign with the crowdfunder, because we want to make sure the public want this sculpture. And if they support the crowdfunder, then we can be reassured that they do. But I think the public need to be much more involved in the commissioning of work in public realm, much more engaged. There's a few more questions. How do you feel technology is impacting public art, and this in particular?
Do you want to, shall I answer? I think what really we would not have had this conversation before now. So now that it seems okay. It seems more than okay. It seems right. It feels that the possibilities, not just it feels like it's the doors are become open in relation to that, and that there's a whole world out there that's that we just need to make sure people can be part of, simply. And it's extraordinary and beautiful and kind of enriching. So why not do that, and not do it in a way that's exclusive? So it's not just if you've got all the right equipment or you've got the right kind of you know, mindset. Like, let's try and make it so that it's everyone and anyone. I mean, the last person hope will be my mother, but like she still hasn't ever been, you know, like, but then again, that work in particular, it's bronze, it would be a bronze, so it would work for her anyway too, you know. And I think it's like with many things, as long as it's all integrated, as long as it kind of all works together, then it's could be absolutely extraordinary. I mean, you know, I think that one of the artworks are a bit like portals, you know, or wormholes, like they take you all over the place, and using the digital alongside them, or alongside anything, like it makes you feel like, oh my goodness, I can look forward and I can look back from this moment. You could use that in any way. I mean, it's very exciting to use in terms of architecture in particular, you know, like what was here before and what has gone past and what might be there. And that just makes us yeah, that's just super exciting to add those fictions in.
And another technical question from Dawn Langley. Heather and Ivan, how is the move into VR changing your creative process?
Funny way, we've not used VR quite in this way before, but we've always sort of sculpted our work at some point digitally. Although we've always prioritized the physical, I guess, in terms of how, like the physical making of the work or the physical modeling over creating digitally. But interestingly, through this period, there was a show. There was a show we were meant to have opening in a week's time at home in Manchester, and that was with a group of young creatives called Future 20, and I've been leading them as sort of lead artist role. And that unfortunately the gallery's still shut, and we understood that to be the case like 4 months ago. And very early on then we had to sort of decide what we would do with that, and we decided we were going to make a virtual, not a virtual version of the show, but we were going to take all the ideas of what that were embodied within the show that we were going to make, because at that point we knew what we wanted to do. It was going to be the last place on earth. We were going to make this idea the last place on earth. We decided we could take all those ideas and realize them virtually. And one of the first sort of exercises we did was really just to understand that there were no longer any limits to what we could make. So people made models, and then we put them into VR, and we sort of exploded them massively or spun them around, and we started doing things with sound, and the creative potential's incredible, really. And the problem is you need to sort of rein that in so it makes sense. It's not just about having a big idea and doing a big idea. Big's not a problem, so it comes with its own things you have to be careful with, but also it's an incredibly powerful and tool, and I think it's going to be really, really exciting. And how to mix those two things, I think, something we're really looking forward to.
I think it's that thing about kind of like the connection between the physical, the real stuff, the sculptural things, the materials, and then the digital. That we seem to have made that there's we seem to have been able to make that connection thus, over the last 5 months, like to make something, to hold something, to have it and then translate it onto the screen. Actually it's been and to start with ideas, so not start with tech, just start with ideas and then bring the tech towards it. Actually that's it's been really quite a journey.
I think just the other thing the VR offers is it's opened up for us. I mean, in this project we'd be doing for home, how collaborative a process it can be, how we could take 12 different people with 12 incredibly disparate practices and create something that feels cohesive and different from any one of our own individual practices, and it's opened us all up. So yeah, I'd say we're really excited.
Great. There's I've got the two one question and I think one statement, but it'd be nice to consider at the end. Patrick Holmes says, boring practical question, does the project budget include money to maintain the sculpture once installed? Who will cover that? I think, shall I answer that one? So it's we're actually in the process of discussing how we're going to make this bronze sculpture be sited on Southsea Common, and the Portsmouth City Council Planning Department are incredibly enthusiastic about it. But of course, we've also got the Seafront Defenses project happening. So the intention is to site it on Southsea Common, pretty much where the Luna Park originally had been, so a bit further back from the coast, but then to move it to become part of the coastal defences. So one rather hopes that it can be incorporated into future maintenance plans of that project. But that's something that we've got to work through over this next year. That's all part of the joy of making projects happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, there's two now. So Patrick also says, I like the use of VR on a dinosaur, as all representations of dinosaurs are made up virtual. Maybe all representations of all things are too. There could be a deep philosophical point there, but it's beyond him. Is it something either any of you want to comment on? About philosophical points of representations?
I think you bang on there, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could, I mean, the fact, as Hannah said, the Ultrasaurus was made up anyway in the first place. You know, it was a chimera of parts, and the very fact that we feel our works, you know, the temporary public works, you know, the power of them is to create that idea of myth. You know, that there's the moment of the work, but there's also the story that goes with the work and how that's told and how that's perpetuated, and also how that then evolves in a way, you know, and so much, you know, meaning, I guess, comes, you know, to us through stories. Interested in how Luna Park can grow and evolve, I guess, how that story of it can change, you know, sort of grow with Portsmouth. So, but that, I guess, you know, is part of what our process is. It's an open thing. It's not a scripted process. I think things will happen along the way.
Well, I think in part you've pretty much almost answered that last question. Do you see this next step as further mythologizing and allowing interpretation of the idea of the Ultrasaurus?
Yeah.
More myth making.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you know, that kind of like we've got a few permanent sculptures, you know, and I do I think about them sometimes when I can't sleep. I think like I kind of like run them through my head in terms of where they are and what's happening to them, and you know, I kind of think about, like, I hope that like maybe that might happen with that work with someone else as well, you know, like you just have a little think about it, like it just sits with you. And I think the thing about art, if art's really, really good, if it does its job, what it should do is it should send off little sparks and messages and signs to everyone who goes past, and you should then feel like doing and making something yourself, or what should spark a thought in you. I suppose that's called inspiration. I don't really like that. I like that kind of like, it's like the Ultrasaurus will sort of wave at you, and you'll be like, oh, like maybe it'll just be a little drawing you did, or maybe you don't even have a logical connection, but it just got you thinking about dinosaurs, which got you thinking about something else, got you thinking about something else, and then there was a piece of music, and then 10 years later you made something. So it should connect if it works, and then that's sort of like, yeah, that and I would say that's how I've got where I'm because of other artists' work, musicians, writers, artists, all kinds of people, filmmakers, whatever, you know, like that made me creative. So I think it's sort of let's see where it takes you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thanks, Heather. Well, it's been great to catch up with you all. I wonder if we'll be back in 10 years' time.
Probably.
Talking about the next iteration. Luna Park keeps growing. I just want to say a really big thank you to you all for joining us to mark the 10th anniversary of Luna Park and to talk about what our future plans are. And please, if you haven't already taken a look, please visit lunapark.land and have a look at our crowdfunder, where I wax lyrical about why you should support this next iteration. So please do take a look, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Bye all.